A federal jury convicted Elizabeth Holmes on 4 of 11 charges for her role in a years-long fraud scheme while running her startup, Theranos. Over the course of the high-profile trial, the prosecution set out to prove that Holmes intentionally misled investors and patients about the efficacy of Theranos' blood testing technology. Jurors heard from 29 government witnesses and reviewed reams of documents, text messages, emails, and reports. They also heard directly from Holmes herself, who spent 7 days on the stand. She acknowledged regrets, but maintained that she never defrauded anyone. The jury found her not guilty on 4 other counts and failed to reach a verdict on 3 counts. With cameras banned in the courtroom, WSJ's Sara Randazzo brings us all the highlights from Holmes' testimony. Elizabeth Holmes shocked a lot of people when she took the stand. What was the defense's strategy in having her talk?
She's good at working a room. She's good at convincing people. It's what she had done her whole career. She had convinced tons of high-profile investors and Washington luminaries and the like to buy into her vision. And really, this was just the ultimate sales pitch, her taking the stand to tell her side of the story.
In the first part of her testimony, the defense walked the jury through the early days of Theranos.
They painted her as an entrepreneur who had great intentions and was really trying to improve healthcare. She said she thought things were going well, and she'd get reports from a study saying, oh, these results were excellent, and she wanted to share that with investors. And so she gave a lot of examples of times when scientists and others were telling her things were on track.
Another big topic throughout the trial, Holmes' comments about her company's relationship with the military. Here's a clip prosecutors played of Holmes talking to investors in 2013.
We built the business around our partnerships with pharmaceutical companies and our contracts with the military, wherein we could deploy our framework.
A lot of investors said that they backed Theranos because of its relationship with the military, which didn't exist. How did Holmes answer to that?
She basically insisted, up, down, and sideways, that she did not recall ever telling an investor that the Theranos device was being actively used by the military. And so it was this very odd disconnect where we had heard from several investors who said, she said this in pitches, and that was a big thing that that got us to invest.
Holmes explained that Theranos was jointly working on several studies with the U.S. Department of Defense, but she acknowledged that no military partnerships ever resulted from the studies. Another key moment came when Holmes conceded to one of the prosecution's key pieces of evidence. She admitted to altering Theranos documents to include the logos of major pharmaceutical companies. Investors testified that the doctored reports helped convince them to buy into the startup.
She said, yes, I added the logos of pharmaceutical companies to the top, but I didn't think that was misleading. I just thought it showed that this report was done in consultation with the pharmaceutical companies. So she didn't frame it in the same way the prosecution did, even as she said she was the one responsible for it.
Another key issue in the trial was Theranos' use of blood testing devices made by other companies. Prosecutors played this video clip of Holmes speaking with CNBC's Jim Cramer in 2015.
Every test that we offer in our laboratory can run on our proprietary devices.
Holmes falsely claimed Theranos could run more than 200 tests on its proprietary device. In reality, the device could only perform a dozen tests.
We heard her basically say publicly for the first time what they did with these third-party devices, and that, yes, they bought third-party machines and modified them so that they could run their tiny blood samples that they said were being run on their own proprietary machines.
A pivotal moment in Holmes' testimony came when she claimed she had suffered sexual and emotional abuse.
It was, of course, very traumatic and serious allegations that she brought, saying that her former boyfriend, Sunny Balwani, who was also her top deputy at Theranos, really controlled her life on a micro level, controlling when she could sleep, when she could eat, how she ran her business, what she should do to be a better business person, and even saying that he forced her to have sex when she didn't want to.
Sunny Balwani has denied the abuse allegations. Prosecutors presented evidence in the form of hundreds of text messages between Holmes and Balwani showing loving exchanges. Balwani faces a separate trial next year for the same fraud and conspiracy charges as Holmes. He has denied the allegations against him.
It really was emotional, powerful testimony. The problem was it didn't relate to the fraud that was being alleged that had happened. She even explicitly said, no, I'm not saying that Sunny told me what to tell investors and what to tell business partners, but she was saying he clouded kind of everything about what she did.
In the prosecution's cross-examination, Holmes expressed remorse for how Theranos treated lab employees and handled situations with reporters. Prosecutors told jurors how Theranos threatened scientists with legal action to keep them from talking to journalists about problems at the lab. Holmes also testified about her attempts to quash Wall Street Journal reporting. The journal broke story after story about Theranos' failed technology.
I think the strategy there is to make her look more human. If you take the stand and say, I did nothing wrong, I've never done anything wrong in my life, a juror is going to have a hard time relating to that. When she said things like, the way we handled the Wall Street Journal process was a complete disaster, and yes, I really wish we had treated Erica Chan, one of the lab scientists, better. We could have done that differently. It showed she was taking some responsibility.
Holmes's final verdict could have a lasting impact in the world of Silicon Valley venture capital startups.
White-collar cases are very hard to bring. Fraud is very hard to prove. And there's always a lot of questions over whether it's worth it for the government to bring a case like this. And so this could give other companies in Silicon Valley pause, but it certainly is notable in that it's very rare for a startup and startup culture to be considered a crime.
What does this decision mean for Holmes?
Sentencing will follow. We don't know yet what kind of sentence she'll have, but each wire fraud count carries a maximum sentence of 20 years. And so she's looking at potentially years in prison. A lot of factors go into sentencing. It's really a complex matrix where they take into account prior convictions, things like that, which obviously she doesn't have. So it'll be really interesting to see what the judge does with sentencing.